I'm curious because I already had a metaverse project, right? And I was thinking, to me, it sounds kind of hard to. I think metaverses are really early right now. I think massive adoption is going to be much later on because even things that we consider more mainstream, like cryptocurrency, are not even that, out on the public, right? Like, not a lot of people hold cryptocurrency. I think it's like around 5%, which is still a lot, right? But it's, metaverses are even more recent, right? So my question is, if you, let's say everyone started to go into metaverses, right? What are the downsides and the upsides of that? Like, for example, if a lot of people are in like virtual environments, what would happen to everyday life outside those environments? Do you think would be positive, negative, half and half? Can you guys tell me more about what do you think of that?
I actually love this question because this is a question from somebody who probably isn't participating a whole lot, and you're just an observer. So what I would say is that the intuitive design behind the only way a metaverse will work will actually solve this issue. And what I mean by that is I'm somebody who participates quite a bit in VR, or I did a lot before I got as busy as I am now. And you do feel a social connection in VR, and then you also feel a real life disconnect. And that in itself is like a fundamental issue of the type of metaverses that you've seen balloon in recent days or in recent years. But the fix to that, I believe, as like an industry insider, is open XR and mixed reality. So what you'll see adoption not just from the consumer side, but as well from like the industry leaders will be to push a mixed reality. Therefore, you can almost on your own toggle how much of in the metaverse you want to be. And like I mean that within any given scene. So even whenever you're like walking down the street, you can either just have like a regular display where you see everything as it is in real life, or you can have an open AR display that gives you directions and stuff like that. Or you could actually go into an entirely new world that's mapped around the real world around you. And of course, as you said, we're probably a few years off from this, but I think that's the natural progression because if not, your root question is true. You would have a lot of downsides if everything was actual virtual reality related. If you pulled more and more people out of real life and put them into a metaverse, I think that you would probably see some emotional issues across the board, I'd say.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure if Luca wants to add something.
Yeah, just to jump in on that. I mean, for us, it's like the prime positioning, right? Because you don't want to be coming into a market or an industry, so to speak, once it's already beyond its high growth phase and it's currently starting to, mellow out. A lot of like in business terminology, you would call it more or less your cash cow once it gets past that growth phase. So for us, realistically, what we're trying to do is position ourselves early on in the market so that way we can grow alongside it. Another cool thing about, for example, like with our project in particular, MBC, one of the big things is we're not just trying to make a metaverse only on itself. We're trying to make a lot of tools and services and applications that supplement and complement the metaverse and those technologies.
Got it. Okay, so I have some things to add to this conversation, right? First of all, is if when we talk metaverse, right, we usually think about something really immersive, right? For example, you said you spent a lot of time in VR, right? And for me, VR chat is the closest we have to a metaverse because the other so-called metaverse, like the big ones on Web3, like the Sandbox, and I forgot the name of the other, they barely have any users. We're talking about, a couple, I think 500 was the number, which is really low compared to, how much they raised and how much they have developed in theory. And I've never heard someone telling me like they've been on a metaverse, even if they kind of work in metaverse, which is kind of funny. So the thing here is, you said like it's easy to tell when you're not in reality, but I know a lot of people who are really addicted to VR chat, right? And you said that could be fixed because you would go out in the street with like some kind of technology that would allow you to kind of like see the real world just a bit mixed. But my question is, is that the concept of metaverse? Because when I think metaverse, I think me with a VR, like, visor strapped in my room and just like kind of like VR chat. However, this might be a misconception because I'm not that well versed in metaverse. I just, like I said, I've seen VR chat and I've played VR chat. And to me, that's the closest we have been to a metaverse, because the other metaverse, what I've seen, doesn't really look that immersive or cool. So yeah, if you guys want to add on that, that would be perfect, because like I said, I'm kind of ignorant in this theme and I want to learn more from the experts, right? So.
Well, I mean, I think your assumption right now is correct. Like, if you talk to me and my VR team, because that is what we do right now. Our daily bread and butter is building in VR. So if you talk to any of us, we'll tell you, like, right now, if you were going to point at a quote unquote metaverse, you would be talking about like a VR chat or an alt space. That's about the closest thing that anybody has made that, in my opinion at least, could be a consideration of what we would consider a metaverse. It gives you access to a digital platform that has numerous different worlds built on it, and you can access all of them. But that's not necessarily what's going to be what drives mass adoption and what we all actually experience and utilize here in a few years. These platforms may still exist and they may actually grow and they may combine with other platforms. But what we will all experience will end up being brought to us natively, more than likely by some of the larger giants that you all already are in business with. And what I mean by that is Microsoft will probably continue to still deliver more and more experiences in tech within this field, as well as Apple and Google directly. Google just made a huge purchase of SideQuest VR. And so these companies are really investing a lot of money in it now and into the early development and integration, but they probably all see it the same way that like you or I do, or most people that look at the metaverse right now today. They see a very infant product that is too disconjointed. If you wanted it to be a friendly user experience, you're going to end up having a lot more of a seamless experience. And I think personally, again, that'll actually be embedded into your everyday regular life. A prime example of this, let me just give you like what I would think of a vision would be that you would have of a quote unquote metaverse in a few years. We would wake up, you'd put on like your typical glasses, maybe they're Apple glasses or Android glasses. And like my phone, I use a Google Pixel right now. I already have set daily routines on my phone. So whenever my alarm goes off in the morning, my alarm goes off, my phone quietly starts playing music, the light that's next to my bed slowly dims on. And in the same way, if you woke up and you put on your glasses and you started to walk out the door or started to get ready, maybe as soon as you entered your bathroom, it would automatically pop open what the weather is like outside and would actually give you like a little visual display of like the weather forecast on the glasses. And then as soon as you went to go into your car, your turn-by-turn navigation's automatically going to pop up and it's going to be augmented on the real world. And then say you got to work, you walk into your office, you don't like your office because you work in cubicles. So you already have your headset or your glasses preset to give you a different environment. So whenever you walk into that office space, it's no longer those dreadful cubicles, dreadful office that you used to walk into. Now it's a beautiful space that you've designed. Maybe it's the rainforest. and you're walking right in there, you're going to work. Whenever you sit down at your desk, your computer and your keyboard still pop up and you can sit there and work just as you would, but your entire surrounding is a different environment. All of this ideally would be seamless, brought to you by whatever personal computer provider you have. So like in the moment, we all use cell phones. So if you're using like an Apple device or an Android device, they're probably going to have all of this embedded directly into their firmware. At least that's what like an optimist view, in my opinion, would be.
Yeah, no, I think that was really perfectly said by Chris. And just to kind of wrap that into a bow, when I was talking with one of our VR devs a while ago, Metaverse Josh, we were just kind of going back and forth about video games. And the topic of a fairly older game called Gary's Mod got brought up. And really, for a lot of people looking to recreate or create a metaverse, what you're trying to do is create a experience that allows a level of social connectivity similar to something that you would previously find in an MMO or video games like Gary's Mod, where on isolated servers, people have kind of been able to break that game out and add a lot of things to it, making it more into like a role play sort of fashion almost. So I really do think that right now the technology, like kind of like how you mentioned, really isn't there for that seamless, experience going from metaverse or world to world. But in terms of what people are trying to achieve with the connectivity and the social aspect of it, I think there's really good examples of that are already in existence that people just kind of have to think through differently. And things like Gary's Mod or World of Warcraft are good examples of that connectivity side, in my opinion.
Well, and that's why I think where you see like success, quote unquote, right now is with those like direct experience driven applications. So like big screen VR is definitely probably top 5 most popular applications on any VR headset. And all it is a movie theater. And you're going to the movie theater and watching movies. It seems very simple and nothing like too crazy complex, but they've delivered a great social experience. It's something that makes sense for VR right now today. You are people that are in different places in the world. So if we all three right now wanted to meet up and we wanted to go watch a movie together, we could all throw on our headsets, we could all go to the theaters, and you are there together and you're watching the movie together. And it seems very much so in an immersive way that you are actually in the theater with these other people. So like those experiences that are easily delivered and derived from real life experiences that make sense in VR are already exceptionally successful in comparison to like VR as a whole. So like there's a lot of VR games and small things that are just dumb and people hate and it makes people sick and nobody likes them. But just about everybody that tries big screen VR out, or like a comedy club or going to like an Oculus venues, anybody who tries out those experiences almost immediately gets it. They're like, oh, this is awesome. This does make sense. I could see why somebody would want to do this. So it's, in my opinion, again, for like that mass adoption level where everybody gets involved, you'll always have some people that are like gamers and they want to do very specific things within like a metaverse or VR application. But for mass adoption, it really is just going to be about figuring out really good ways to deliver those like real life experiences derived in VR.
Well, when you say it like that, it does sound more appealing, I'm not gonna lie. But regardless, I think it's more like connectivity amongst people, right? That's what it makes easier. Because in my opinion, like why would I want to go to a movie theater in VR when I can go in real life, unless it's with people I cannot go in real life, right? That's part of the attraction, I guess.
That's the thing, is you're going to be able to go and visit with family members that are in a different state or country, and y'all can go to the same theater at the same time and experience that together. I will say one small caveat to that is, if you've never watched a 3D movie in VR, you've never seen a 3D movie ever in your life. A 3D movie in VR is amazing compared to like any other way you ever could watch it.
Oh, I definitely see the appeal when you when you tell me these advantages, right? It makes sense. Now I do want to try more VR. I'm not gonna lie, because I'm not that fan of VR. I think it's fun, but I think it's too tiring sometimes, right? Even though I'm used to playing games, sometimes I think VR can be a bit overwhelming. And for people who are not really used to, playing games that much, or digital environments, I think it would be really difficult, like you said. But the point of this is make it seamless, right? So that makes sense.
I think you're right about that for anybody. Like, even for myself, as somebody who uses VR a fair bit, a lot, it's tiring for me. Even like the thought process behind, like, all right, I'm gonna have to make sure my headset's charged. I'm gonna have to pull out my headset, put it on. I'll be stuck in there for an hour or more. All of those thoughts are 100% real, like, problems that I believe are getting solutions right now.
Well, we have to take a peek at the future, and hopefully, it becomes more seamless, and everyone has access. But that's probably gonna be like a while. Let me, get you guys into a bit of a tangent here. So, is it concerning for you that big companies are getting involved into VR? And hear me out. This is why I think it's kind of concerning. We see more censorship every time, on like platforms, like social media platforms, right? So Facebook is, being a big advocate of the metaverse and stuff like that, right? So to me, it's a bit concerning if they monopolize, because I don't like censorship. I think everyone should be entitled to their opinion, even if it's definitely trash, because in my mind, I have enough faith in humanity to correct trash opinions or discard them, right? That's what I think. And when I see really big companies who advocate for censorship getting into these niches who are not really developed, but in theory they will be super developed in future years, that's kind of concerning to me. And I want to hear from you guys, what do you think? Also, I think, when big companies get involved, usually other small companies have a harder time to thrive, or they get, bought or something. But that's, I think, a bit of another topic.
Luca, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I have, some pretty unique thoughts about this, I would say, at least. So you have the general consensus of larger companies getting into the industry realistically is going to further drive adoption. It's going to speed up the rate of advancement on the tech side. And on top of that, it's going to bring funding into the area. Now, these are good and bad things, right? On the positive end, you see smaller companies kind of like in a Google situation, where Google acts as just this mothership, and they want to just essentially buy out smaller companies that they see on the rise and that they see potential in. Alternatively, you have the opposite side, where it's something more like Facebook or Meta, where they're attempting to build everything from the ground up themselves. And then you have, almost like a third angle, where you have the Microsoft approach, where you just want to create realistically some of the assets for that area and try to drive monetization out of it, but you're not really looking to fully invest at this moment, in my opinion. A lot of people will argue that there's more censorship that comes with big tech. That's true, but I personally don't think it's any more censorship in terms of the capabilities or possibilities of it, compared to if a smaller company wanted to try to implement specific things or try to censor certain things, a smaller firm that was in the same amount of control could do that just as easily. I think realistically, there's a lot of internal controls at these companies, and it's pretty rare that one person would be able to influence something that heavily onto a censorship side. And then just to play devil's advocate as well, you do need censorship to a certain extent. I mean, if you want to take a look at open forum pages like 4chan almost, where there isn't any censorship really outside of them removing spam posts, so to speak, it just turns into a environment that a very select few people want to actually operate in on a regular basis. The majority of people actually want censorship. It's just that the censorship each individual wants is unique to them. So I do think it's a bit of a loaded thing, but overall, I think it's good that there's larger tech companies getting into VR. Ultimately, I think it's going to help speed up the rate of adoption. It'll allow smaller firms the opportunity to get merged into larger firms. And on top of that, too, it may not seem like you should trust a company like Meta over a small mom and pop company. But realistically, Mark Zuckerberg has less of an effect on the actual day-to-day at Meta than the CEO of a smaller company would on the day-to-day of that company. It's just like you have to keep certain economies of scale, like concepts in the back of your head.
Yeah. And, I'd say that more than likely the interest would always be the same, especially like on these consumer driven products. These are things where certain problems realistically, in my opinion, are only going to be solved by certain levels of centralization. And this is something that's like weird for me to talk about because most people know me as like this giant DeFi maxi, and I am, but at the same time, I'm a realist. And there's certain software limitations that you won't actually get around or get over unless there's like some profound level of centralization. And what I mean by that is just if we look at like the video game industry and we look at like cross-platform play, when did we finally see that like actually become a thing? Really not until like Fortnite forced it on everybody. Like they just made it happen. It was such a popular large game that they were able to circumvent certain things on their own that made cross platform available that then was just shoved on everybody. And it's something that everybody begged for years. It was always a no, 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 no. And then it happened. And because of that, the consumers are actually now delivered with a better experience. And like now it's kind of the way that everything's coming out. So I would look at it as hopefully a benefit with an obvious risk that everybody is aware of.
Well, I do think, just touching on that really quick, centralization, well, true decentralization is virtually impossible, right? We need someone to coordinate stuff. We need a central, I don't know, call it government or like system or whatever you want to call it. It would not be possible to survive as a species if everyone just went on their own, right? It doesn't make sense. It's virtually impossible. And I also think even in crypto, lots of big companies own like nodes and stuff, right? So I don't think we will ever reach, through decentralization. And I don't think we should, if I'm being honest. I think, we need some regulation, right? My only problem is when things get centralized, it's usually just imposed by monetization, right? So now every government wants a piece of crypto because they see it's getting profitable, right? And I think they should focus first on security and then on taxing. But, money is always the most important thing, I guess. But moving on, I want to talk about something Luca mentioned, which is, some people, everyone wants censorship, but on their own measure, which I think it's a really interesting and kind of intelligent point. I've never heard someone argue with that logic, and I think that makes sense. But where, we can say we have a consensus on what should be like censored, right? Like we don't want people being racist or, homophobic or stuff like that. But where do you draw the line of censorship? What do you guys think? What's like a topic, because for some people talking about biology could be triggering, and for others no. And I don't want to get too political, but my question is, what's a measure to see what should be censored and what not? Because I also think, when we let forums like 4chan open, at least those degenerates can be in that space and not like, go to other places. Because if, let's say, 4chan were to close, those people have to go somewhere else, right? So they would go to Reddit or Twitter or whatever they would go. And I think that would be a bigger problem than just let them on their own cesspool of shit, which is 4chan, right? So what do you guys think about that?
All right. So that's a fantastically difficult question. I'll tell you from my experience, because I have, somewhat of a community. We at MetaBUSD have, Discord server, Twitter space, blah, blah, blah. So we have somewhat of a following, a community formulated, and it's very small, comparatively speaking to like the general public. But I am a believer that censorship is something that is community handled. And you build the community foundation from the leadership down. So how like the leaders anywhere, government, projects, tokens, whatever, companies, how the leadership conducts itself and has its team conduct itself will usually set the tone for the community. And then if you hold that tone and uplift it when it should be, the community will usually police itself. And that's how I personally choose to operate. Because whenever you talk about like hard censorship of certain topics and stuff like that, I believe you miss out on opportunity for nuanced education. I try my hardest to allow everybody that is in my community or any other community around me to be as open and willing to share their point of view as possible, even when I disagree with it. It doesn't always mean it's wrong. I'm not always right, and that's a very interesting topic in general. I'm sorry. I wish I had a clearer answer for you.
Oh, no worries. That was a curveball. I don't expect to have. First of all, I think your answer was fantastic. Second of all, I know these are hard topics, and it's just it's casual. It is not a debate. We're just hearing each other out, right? So no worries if it's not like ready for a thesis, concept, right? So that's fine. Do you want to add anything to that, Luca?
Jump in on that. I mean, it really does come down to kind of like how Chris said, the censorship that the censorship that any organization is going to implement is really based on the censorship that its users want. Now, there's certain things like an overwhelming majority of people don't want to see gore or things like that on their homepage or right in their face when they load things up. Now, there's people on 4chan who do like to see that, and I'm glad that they have a space to operate in. But realistically, it kind of just depends on the market or the demographic that you're trying to hit. Us as an organization, realistically, what we're trying to do is make it easier and more accessible for the general public to come in. And there's general consensuses about, what the general public wants and doesn't want. A good example is they don't want to see porn or gore just at random and on a whim at any possible time. Once, maybe someone's kid or family member could be looking or trying out their VR headset. That's a really good example of it. But yeah, realistically, it is going to depend on what your community or what your user base is and what they want. Now, if for some reason our user base drifts way over to one far end of the spectrum, obviously we would have to adapt and either look to increase our user base in other areas or look to play to those strengths and try to appease that user base. But realistically, from our perspective, we're trying to make, a place that people enjoy coming to. And so a sense of censorship, realistically, something more reasonable would be like, hey, we don't allow people to spam a bunch of images of people getting beheaded, for example. Like that seems like a pretty, common ground for censorship that I think most people would be on the same page for.
I think you guys are quite based, like the young generations would say. Sorry, I'm Gen Z, so I'll just say random shit. Times that. No, I definitely agree with what you guys said. There has to be a balance and things that most people agree with. For example, no racism, no beheaded people, no random porn. And yeah, I think it's not that hard to regulate. I think it's just sometimes big companies stand for like really specific things, and which brings it to what Meta Captain said. It's like sometimes it has to do with the leadership and they can oppose what they want to be censored, which I don't agree, but I think we can have a general consensus of what should be censored. But let's change to a new topic that I'm anxious to hear your opinion, guys, since you develop stuff. And it's that I've seen this trend lately of developing games that are not good and just like grab the cash and fuck off and then try to maybe rebuild them. But they're so sad and mediocre. And I want to know, why do you guys think this is happening? Let me put some examples, right? Halo Infinite, it's been stale for the last like 8 months, and the basic features they promised have not been added. Battlefield 242, absolute trash. Like even previous instances of the game that are way older have like better physics and better effects and more attention to detail. I forgot Cyberpunk, of course. Cyberpunk, absolute garbage, unplayable game. You needed a render farming PC to play it, and it was still super broken, and it's heartbreaking because everyone was expecting it. And I think there's this trend now of releasing incomplete shitty games and just try to fix it on the fly. And I don't really know why is this happening, because these companies have more money than ever with the pandemic accelerating game adoption and people playing games. So I'm not sure. I wish I knew why this is happening. This keeps happening. But I don't really have an idea. So I want to hear, what do you guys think?
Okay. So he went from hard to harder on these questions, didn't he?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I actually have a pretty strong opinion about this sort of stuff. Is it all right if I jump in, Chris?
Yeah, you can go first. I actually have good opinions on this too. But yeah, go right ahead, Luca.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry.
No, this is good stuff. And I mean, just to give you a little bit of context, kind of like how I mentioned Gary's mod, World of Warcraft. I'm someone who grew up playing video games. I started out on things like RuneScape, MapleStory, and slowly gradually drifted into other sectors of games. And I have my fair share of games that I bought in what a lot of developer companies call the alpha stage. And the biggest example, in my opinion, is DayZ, or PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. Those are two games that realistically released at really good positions in their alpha stage. They were arguably playable, but unfortunately, once they got the money from it, the effort and the quality of the future updates went down fairly heavily. And I think this is something that, unfortunately, that you see not only in video games, but in other aspects of the world as well. A really good example of cryptocurrency and DeFi projects. You have a lot of people coming out with effectively half-baked crypto projects that are releasing in their alpha stage, so to speak. They're taking funds when realistically they don't have a fully functioning idea or protocol yet. And ultimately what it does is they get the funds. They realize that their growth is incredibly limited because they've sapped or tapped as many markets as they could with where their game is at currently. And they realize it would take a lot of investment in order to get a significant or a material amount more or an increase. Because realistically, once you're at that stage where you're already taking in money, everything's marginal, right? You're going to have to spend more dollars to make each extra dollar in most cases. So yeah, in my opinion, it's something that you see everywhere. And it's weird because if you look back, even 15 years ago at the start of the video game industry, there were games releasing with bugs and things like that. And there were games releasing maybe before they shouldn't have, but it has gotten so much worse that it's kind of staggering. And truly, I think it's just a part of how, society has evolved. I think people are a lot more short-term thinking. They're more willing to take a risk nowadays as well. Like, I think if you would have tried to pitch somebody on an alpha stage game back in the 90s, they would kind of think of you as insane. Like, why would I buy something that's not complete? Or why would I buy something that isn't finished? But I think people are just more willing to take that risk. They're more desperate for new content more than ever. And people are just moving from, whether it's game to game to game or project to project to project. I think it's an issue across multiple markets.
I think to get macro on that answer with so Cyberpunk's a fantastic example of this. I think we've now seen it's come out where there was internal struggles on the team where they knew it wasn't ready and they needed to push back. But you also once you have a functioning business like that, you have other things going on where regardless of how that public reception of that game might be on that release, it's going to do so many numbers. And there's people above the creative teams that are technically above them in the corporation that need to see those numbers on paper, and like they have to see them at a certain point. So I think for a lot of the larger firms like that, that's where they get stuck in like these wild, weird constraints where, because it has came out that the team wanted pushback on that. They wanted like more time, but their estimate was a long time. I think they said that they needed like an additional 6 months to a year is what they wanted, which is a long time to push stuff like that off. And for some reason, the backswing from that was, no, you have to release it at this point, which is just strange. But that's how I think that situation went down, and that's pretty common. And then the Halo Infinite, I think, hits exactly what Luca was talking about, to a different level, though. So as soon as it's out there and they see the numbers on paper, they see everything dropping as quickly as it was dropping off, even though it was very clear for like an outside perspective like mine or yours that, hey, it's only dropping off because you guys aren't following through with updates and, actually supporting the community and what they want to see. OP problems on some of the weapons, all types of stuff. So the issues that were there, I think the the daily use count dropping so fast actually gave them incentive to not necessarily put those dollars to work per se, if that makes sense.
Okay, so everything you guys mentioned makes sense. It's just depressing. Like right now, I'm depressed. It's so.
Oh yes. I'm right there with you, man. I mean, like, yeah, don't get me wrong. Sometimes we get like that. Like me and him are both very much just like realists as far as like just calling it how it is and talking about it. It's the only way that you can work through some of these problems, because he hit on it at the end. Like, yeah, these are somewhat like corporation problems, but is it not also caused by like our willingness to participate in stuff like this continually? And like whether or not it's like you or not individually, it's the market as a whole. And it almost seems sometimes just like a losing fight.
Yeah, I think we did facilitate, this to happen, of course, because like Luca mentioned, you emphasized, who the fuck would buy like a game, in the 90s when you knew the game was not ready, right? It doesn't make sense, right? And it breaks my heart to see that Super Metroid, a game that was in the 80s, it still has better game design than a lot of new games, and more dedication than a lot of new games. When they didn't have resources nor it was popular, not like nowadays. But yeah, no, it's terrible. I fucking hate it, honestly. And working around and being around, I realized that a lot of big companies don't know what the fuck they're doing, which is crazy because they raise millions and millions of dollars and they have no idea what they're doing, and it's so pathetic and sad and terrible. Like Twitch, for example, Twitch TV. I cannot believe how such a big platform and like the monopolize the streaming space can be fucking up so hard. And I'm not gonna get too into it because I'm not sure if you guys are into Twitch, and unfortunately the time is running. So let's get into a happier topic. Unless you guys want to add something really quick. If not, let's get into your project, guys. So what I like to do is I want you to tell me, like, if I were someone of a 50-year-old who has no idea about what you guys do, I want you to pitch your project to me like that. Like, what do you guys do and what do you expect?
Luca, do you want to go first?
Yeah. And so just to make sure, talking about what do we do and really pitching what we do. Yeah, gotcha. So realistically, for MetaBUSD coin, MBC, that's our passion project, is really the best way of putting it. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a lot of the tools and services that are going to be needed for the metaverse. And that doesn't mean explicitly we are just creating our own metaverse, although that is something that we have to create in order to set the I guess, ecosystem for us to actually start creating some of the other technologies and services. But realistically, we want to start creating some of the software that allows people to conduct commerce within the metaverse, starting to actually create those integrations between crypto and VR and AR. And so what that means is making a seamless transaction going from your personal, hot wallet, MetaMask would be probably the most standard one, or Trust Wallet, and being able to send those tokens securely, safely, and as privately as possible to another user that you're interacting with in the metaverse, or perhaps another organization or entity that you're interacting with in the metaverse. And so realistically, what we want to do is we want to try to position ourselves as early as possible, which is, kind of why we're here, in order to grow with the metaverse market and industry, but also to create the tools and the services that are going to be needed to help scale other companies and integrate them with metaverse and Web3. And so a good example of that is we have our pride and joy, which is the work that we do around VR and the actual asset creation and putting things together and making a functional space for people to use. But another thing that we also do is we offer more of a service on consulting for other projects on how they can scale into Web3, how they can actually provide a Web3 or a VR and AR experience to their users without having to kind of like tear out all the parts and reconfigure the entire organization. The goal is to try to make it as agile of an experience as possible, but as immersive and enjoyable as possible as well.
The only thing that I would really like to add on to that is what sets us apart from any other metaverse project. It's not necessarily what we build or provide as for the actual space and the experience. We of course focus strongly on that because we want user acquisition. So we want anybody who comes into the space, we want them to enjoy themselves, want to spend time there, and want to come back and see new things. And it's not even our partnerships, because we hold a lot of partnerships with a lot of different crypto projects and companies within our space, and we build things for them in the metaverse. It's the actual tools that we are developing for the Web3 interactions and reimagining how you can perform Web3 executions through collider interactions within game or within a scene setting. So what I mean by that exactly is whenever you pick something up and you move it somewhere else, or you actually push it towards another object, you have colliders that are going to interact with one another. That data is transmitted. And how can we actually use that data that's created on chain? And what benefits might that have? And we're not talking about just financial transactions. We're talking about actual on chain data transactions. So this shows itself in many different ways depending on the client. But these are the tools that we work on building and developing now to kind of future-proof ourselves for the quote-unquote metaverse. As we talked about a lot earlier in this conversation, we don't actually know what that's going to look like in 3 to 5 years. This space is changing that rapidly. So we want to make sure we stay as agile as possible. And one of the best ways to do that is to build these fundamental tools that we know are applicable through many variations of the technology that we're talking about. So the same tools that we use for our VR platform are the tools that you're able to use on your AR platform or your mixed reality platform that may be around the corner. So that's really where like our actual and what I like to call like true value comes from. What the end user ends up seeing is, of course, a metaverse, and they get to see games and worlds and different stuff like that, and get to go and enjoy themselves. But where we really kind of expand and grow and make our mission hit the home run is through working with other projects and making their visions possible in new extreme interactive ways directly in VR and hopefully one day mixed reality.
Alrighty then. Okay, so let me just recap real quick. So basically you guys are what I would say define like the back end of the metaverse. You will facilitate everything to make it as kind of realistic and immersive as possible, by adding like transactions and data analysis and stuff like that. Did I get it right? Is that like a correct summary?
Yes, that's a fantastic summary.
Nice. Okay, perfect. So you guys need to build a metaverse in order to make sure your tools work, right? That makes sense?
That makes exact sense. It's funny because we spend a lot of time and money building this metaverse just to make sure our tools work. But it's been a fantastic journey, and we have a really good team of builders now that for the actual design elements and stuff like that. So things are really chugging along very quickly currently. But you're exactly right. We're having to build a lot of extra stuff that we enjoy building, and we're able to do it for our partners and other projects, which is good. But we have to do a lot of that just to actually refine some of the fundamental parts of the actual project on a whole.
Yeah, it's understandable. It's such a large structure and so many things you need to implement to make it real, right? So it makes sense. Where can people who are watching / listening to this can see more of you guys and what you guys are building?
Yeah, I mean, definitely if they just head over to our website, metabusdcoin.com, they'll get links to all of our other social media platforms. And the very best place to actually follow the project itself really is our Discord. We have a Discord where we're in there every single day. I have my own developer Discord servers directly attached to our server. So we're always somewhere right then and there to answer questions. But that's also where you're going to get the latest information, the invites to our special events and to our spaces where you can actually dive into the metaverse with us, come hang out, ask personal questions, and you can always get sneak previews of what's to come next with our Web3 lobby.
Beautiful. Thank you guys for that. Thank you for pitching that. Honestly, it sounds really interesting, and I'm not, like I said, I don't get too much into metaverses because what I've seen so far kind of has been disappointed. I'm not gonna lie. But when you guys pitch like that, I'm way more interested, and I think I'll catch up with you guys and keep like watching how you guys develop, because I don't know, in like 10, 20 years we do a podcast and you guys weren't all super huge. I want to be the guy who interviewed you. Okay, so before we wrap it up, let's get into the hot takes of the day. So who wants to start?
I'm going to take a lead from the last guy, and I'm going to go with my hot take is VR is kind of childish right now.
Childish? What do you mean by childish?
I think that's the hot take. It's right now it seems like it's most projects and platforms that have built for VR have modeled it directly off of like Roblox, which I think is like the main depressing note for most people who do finally get to experience VR. They're like, wait, this is what I paid for? So that's changing soon though, I promise.
My guy, you are based as fuck. That's actually super true. That makes a lot of sense. And I've never thought about it because I always thought like, something seems off. Why is this like a playground for kids? And I was like, someone telling me it makes sense. Yeah, that's true. That's a great hot take. I think that's just a good take at this point, honestly. But yeah, moving on. Luca, what's your hot take?
Yeah, so my hot take is not only is 100% decentralized impossible, but it's also inefficient and impractical to try to achieve. Just to kind of go into a little bit more detail on that, decentralization is a core part of crypto, and I think aspects of it are incredibly important. But with full decentralization, you lose the ability to implement things like internal controls. And for context, I'm an auditor, and things like internal controls are realistically what are holding together a lot of the automated systems in day-to-day life. And so I think while true decentralization is a cool idea, kind of like a utopia, I don't think it's practical to implement for really any project. But on top of that, too, in implementing true decentralization, you eliminate your ability to be agile as an organization, in my opinion.
Yeah, let me add to that. I think it's impossible. Like I mentioned, I think being this truly decentralization, like what some people have in mind, it's literally impossible. Everyone needs to have a bit of more responsibility / power, you know, to, because if not, we wouldn't work, you know, as a society. If we were just like, I don't know, like lone wolves, maybe possible, but I don't think as a society we could deal with decentralization. It would be like the purge, but like every single day, you know, we would probably eat each other or something. So yeah, I agree. True decentralization makes only sense on paper, and it sounds great in a utopia, but I don't think that's ever happening ever, unless we evolve and we become some kind of like beings or something, which I don't think I'll see in my lifetime or ever, if I'm being honest. But anyways, yeah, those were great hot takes. I'd say they were good takes, you know, because the funny thing about hot takes is that they can be really stupid, but I think those were pretty good. So yeah, this is the end of the podcast. Do you guys want to add anything else?
Thank you very much for having us. I mean, this has been a really smooth conversation. I enjoyed it. I think you asked some really great questions, even if they were a little difficult. Probably the hardest question, I swear, was that gaming question about like Halo and like, I mean, because everybody was so disappointed, right? Like, I think like that's like like still to this day, anybody who talks about both of those, Halo and Cyberpunk, like there's only one feeling that you get, and it's God, they really let us down on those. Like everybody was looking forward to them, and nobody had a good experience. So
Yeah, no, I thank you guys for coming. Uh, and I totally agree. It was fucking disappointed, but you guys handled the curveballs like a champ. You know, I didn't even mean to be like, you know, ask hard questions. So, but when I see people who, you know, seem to be capable enough to answer the hard stuff, I'm gonna go for it, because if not, who else am I supposed to ask?
that's true, very true. Thanks again for having us on.
Hey, my pleasure. I hope I can see you guys soon. You know, again here or in the news. Maybe like all these guys popped up, and I was like, oh, I interviewed those guys. Luca, you wanna give us some final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, truly, I just want to say thank you for having us on. Really want to encourage everybody to go and check out MetaBUSD coin, just because that's where we're at and that's what we're doing, you know, every single day. And yeah, truly, thank you. This is kind of like a cool full circle moment for me personally, because when I first got into crypto, you know, DX was really one of the big groups, you know, around at that time, and really one of the only established ones within BSC. So it's cool to be able to get to know, you know, the different areas of your guys' organization and get to know everybody there.
Oh, thank you. That's heartwarming, and we hope to make DX great again, hopefully soon. So, well, thank you guys, and see you in the next edition.